Hello. Can you hear me, Brother Christensen? I cannot hear you. Oh, your microphone is mute. No? It's saying like your microphone is showing as mute. So
Can you not hear?
Hello.
hello. I think Brother Christensen is trying to fix his phone, like his microphone.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, good. I thought it was just me.
No.
I was like, what?
No, I can hear you pretty well.
Nope.
Hello? No?
Yeah, now we
There
can
you are.
hear you.
There we go.
Okay.
Yep.
So I have like 3 USB ports on this computer, and I guess only one works for the headset. So
Now.
Which one is it? Which one we gotta guess?
yeah. So you can hear me okay now?
Yep.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. So you got Rachel, we've got Philip, Monique, Matt, and Amanda. Is anybody I missed?
Nope.
And Matt's awesome baby too.
Yeah, my little here.
Yep, family first. That's awesome. All right, there he is. Great. So, how's everybody doing this week? Y'all holding up now? Mid-term, mid-semester?
I can't believe it's already here.
Oh, yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Made it halfway. That's great. You've done this before, but I know, now the downward slope happens, right?
Hopefully it's not a slippery slope.
Yeah. Yeah. Looks like Susan joined us too. Awesome. And Gina, awesome. So very good. The stalwarts are here. Thanks for joining. we're just talking about, how everybody's doing. We haven't really gotten into the substantive discussion yet, Susan or Gina. How did I know there were some technical problems with exam 2. Did you feel like I was fair in the way we approached, giving more days for appeals? I'm not sure what happened. They finally figured it out with tech support. Did anybody feel like it was unfairly dealt with, or that your appeals didn't, weren't properly addressed? Appeal concerns on exam 2 weren't appropriately addressed?
I was never able to get to the exam, but when you gave us 2 extra days, I didn't have time to go and do
Okay.
the appeals. So
Okay, so maybe we can talk offline about what's fair, because I want to make sure everybody feels that we're being fair, and when there's technical problems,
I appreciated it. Because I thought, oh my gosh, how am I going to get this done? I still can't access it. So I appreciated the extra time so that I could get it done.
Okay.
So.
Thanks, Monique. And I know with work schedules and then it became the weekend, some people just, it's not a possibility to take those days when they've planned for 2 other days during the week. So want to make sure we're fair about this. How's the quizzes going, and you feeling like your groups are working out well still?
I love my group, huh, Raquel? Raquel is in my group.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have a great group too. We meet regularly and have get things done and work well together, and so our group's working well as well.
Good.
I feel like our group is really good. I mean, Gina's in our group, and then we have Chase. Chase and I actually were coworkers back before he went up to BYU, Idaho, and his dad is the the CFO or something of our entire department. So it's really cool.
All right. Well, there's your networking and job opportunity then once you graduate. Some of my favorite friends of for life were in college, so this is a good chance to get into a smaller group and get to know people well, and then maybe make the necessary calls you need later on in your career. Very good, Matt and Gina. Good. How's the substantive part of the class? I mean, are we, as we move from UCC and then on to bankruptcy, what challenges, concerns, questions you have? Any?
Susan has a good one.
Well, yeah, I had a question because of the case that I read about. It was 5 years and billions of dollars, and so I just wondered if there was a limitation on the time constraint. That's a long time for a bankruptcy to be completed, and so much money, which most of it went to the lawyer. Well, not most of it, but a lot of it went to the lawyers. And so is there a time limitation on bankruptcies?
There's not, and that is a problem in the law. It's sick, actually, to me. And you might hear things of like, maybe you've heard the word tort reform before. This doesn't apply to bankruptcy yet, but it's a good example of where people are getting together and say, look, if we just had some reform to the way tort law is handled, the ambulance chasing, so to speak, a way to limit damages or a way to get people whole without the lawyers, taking so much of it, or the courts taking forever to decide, then people would take more risks with their business, and maybe business would expand a little bit better, or maybe they can employ more people. Physicians especially are very concerned because they spend 11 years getting through medical school and bachelor's degree and then residency, and then one malpractice case and they've lost their privileges in the hospital, and they're reduced to a prescriber in a local corner office somewhere.
Well, and it should not take 5 years to go through the court system. Mm-hmm. That is just so extreme to me. And so the money went, the 7.3 billion went to the lawyers, former employees, retirees, and bondholders. Well, you know, if they were former employees, they didn't get paid for 5 years. That's just so extreme. It ought to require a time constraint.
It's a very good point. And so, more reason why we need good people like you going into law and politics to change some of this. I mean, I hate to say it, but
Yeah.
we need to change it. Tort reform too. Ever since I left the law firm and it wasn't all about the billable hour anymore, I saw it in a new light. It wasn't about helping people while you made your career, made money. It was about pushing a company forward and seeing the pitfalls that I could remove as a lawyer to get in, like Susan said, get in the face of a bankruptcy court or someone else and say, look, you are holding back an entire subsidiary of employees. We just want to bankrupt this entity and move, have them be able to move forward.
Closure.
Yeah, people want closure. And the problem is the courts, they're either so backed up and backlogged so that you get these, if attorney isn't prepared or if the side isn't prepared, the judge says, okay, let's continue this. And then 4 months later, I know in family law, maybe some of you have struggled with a divorce or adoption of a child. These continuances go 4 months, 5 months out each time.
Yeah.
And the courts say, well, if we had more judges but the thing is due process is so important in our country to make sure everybody's heard and to make sure every little tiny detail is acknowledged. How do you feel? How would you, I guess, change it to make it more streamlined and still be fair? Right? Does anybody have any ideas on examples they've seen, like the one Susan mentioned, that just absolutely is egregious?
Actually, Brother Christensen, if like in Brazil, it takes like 10, 15 years, like law in Brazil. Doesn't work well. I think the United States has a good law, like they work like fast compared to Brazil. So I don't know. I think it's fair that just because I'm comparing to Brazil, it takes like a long time. It's like 8 years. Like if you have like some case that's gonna take like 5 years, you're winning. Like you need to be happy about it in Brazil, So I thought like 5 years was normal. I don't know.
So it could be worse.
Could be
I was
worse.
thinking, interesting perspective, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really interesting.
Huh.
People file bankruptcy. Do they do that online, or do you have to go through a bankruptcy lawyer? Like, I would think that if you did everything online, everything would go faster, maybe.
You would think.
It's a good point. I think a lot of, like here in Arizona, they've gone to I'm not sure if it's online yet, but it's definitely a self bankruptcy group of forms with Intel dedicated or gave away 50 computers, one for each courthouse in Arizona, one for each major courthouse that had bankruptcy in it. And so that people can come up, and this was for adoptions and other things, but you basically use the computer to figure out, either through YouTube or other, how to fill out your forms right when you're sitting there. Now the problem is we gave one computer at every courthouse. Now you've got a line of 10 people waiting to use the the one computer to adopt a child. Some of these people are indigent or very underprivileged, and they're just trying to get it. They're trying to file something against a landlord who's let rats go through their house, and they're waiting in line sometimes in a courthouse for 3 hours just to file. It's what should be, like Gina said, something you should be able to do from your home. And I think that I was practicing in the 90s. We were doing eminent domain through states of Washington, where judges wouldn't even let us use fax signatures because they said you can manipulate a fax signature, but I want to see the signatures on these agreements in blue pen. So I absolutely know that this farmer, signed away his area, his acreage, so that a fiber optic line could be strung through there. We had one judge that thought that fiber optics would deform human beings and people, and so he wouldn't let us go through. He denied the eminent domain, and his reasoning was, I have 2 railroads going through the back of my acreage. Why do we need more than one fiber optic line? And besides, the electronics and stuff going through it are deforming people. Now, this was nothing against Washington. This is rural where, light blips through a fiber optic line. We're going to pay you $1,000, a year to have an easement through there. Anyway, courts and legal is still so far behind in what Gina said. The business and technology that, boy, we have to find a way to be able to authenticate quicker, and it's so important, like many of you have said. So sorry about that diatribe, but you've hit a nerve there with me. I think Brazil, that's unfortunate. It's even worse. I think countries stand up and be model countries for technological authentications and improvements, so we can get things through, get the rabbit through the snake faster.
I have a question. So are most bankruptcy cases public record? Because I was thinking,
Yes.
like the homes, our example was homestead exemption.
Mm-hmm.
I would feel like there's so many cases, but who would want to write an article about that in the Wall Street Journal? I don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot of cases, and really with Google now, it's easier to just search instead of looking at what used to be all the old microfiche to see, I knew that Matthew had filed bankruptcy. I'm not going to allow him to invest with me or something. Now it's as quick as a Google search to find some of this stuff, unfortunately. Reason why in Spain last year they had the right to be forgotten case out of Spain, where a 18-year-old piece of property that was sold by a man named Mr. Gonzalez, he didn't want his ex-spouse to know about it, Google. And so he took that case to the Spanish courts and said, I have a right to privacy. Google has made it impossible for me to have a private life anymore. And he won.
Oh my goodness.
And so now you'll see RTBF everywhere, right to be forgotten. And this is what I do for Intel as privacy attorney for IT and security, working with, how do we give people in Europe the right to be forgotten when they're sacrosanct and their constitutional right to privacy is sacrosanct. Where in the U.S., we've got Patriot Act and NSA and Snowden and all of these things that monitor us. To the Europeans, they want the right to be forgotten. And what's funny, and sorry about boring you, but what Google did the day after that decision is they encouraged like 30 different companies to start businesses called, we will search Google for you over here in the US and send you to the Europeans your information, because it only applied to Google.sp and Google.it and UK. It only applied to European countries, this decision. So now you have 30 companies in the US that are saying to Europeans, if you really want to know, about information for your ex-wife or about whoever, your ex-spouse, tell us and we'll do it for a small, $5, we'll search for you. And the other funny thing that Google did was they posted, you can go Google this, but it's kind of funny. They said anybody that asks to be forgotten, because you have to make a request for Google to have your records removed in Europe. Anybody who requests that, they're going to post on a public list that they requested to have their data removed. And so Google's got this, the court didn't say we can't list who requested to have their information removed. So now they've got this massive list of people.
That's funny.
Yeah. So are they really forgotten? No. Maybe their property sale from 18 years ago is not findable at Google.Italy or Google.sp for Spain, but you can still find it if you really want it. So I find my job very interesting because data, privacy, and security with the new General Data Protection Regulation coming out. I mean, a 4% of global revenue fine the Europeans can assess against you if you don't have your data governed. So it's a lot of long nights for me, but it's very interesting with a company like Intel, how much data. We have 143 petabytes of information. 1 petabyte is like listening to your favorite song for 2,000 years straight.
Oh no.
Gives you an idea of the footprint. We have 143 of those, and they're growing at 50% per year is our problem. So,
does the Privacy Shield cover all of your needs with EU now, or does it still leave a lot of open gaps for you?
great question, Philip. Nice, good research there. Privacy Shield is kind of the U.S.'s, it used to be Safe Harbor, now it's Privacy Shield, but it's the U.S.'s attempt to say any EU data that we bring to the U.S., we self-certify that we will have a certain amount of encryption and security on those EU personal information records that we bring to the U.S., and so we'll do it in a way that makes the Europeans happy. We'll care for it, we'll love it, we'll be tender to it, and white glove treatment. But the problem is big companies like Intel, we have 84 countries we operate in. So I might take Philip's data over to the US, and then I might combine it with some other data and throw it into our India data center, then off to Japan and over for processing in Argentina, and then back. And I have just violated the Privacy Shield by moving it outside of the US. And so the Privacy Shield really only works between EU and US. It doesn't take into account big companies. So we have to use binding corporate rules, another agreement that we made with the EU in Europe this time, that we will heighten our privacy standards to the point of the Europeans and be kind with your data and everything. And also sometimes standard contract clauses when we use subcontractors. So we hook on to the end of our contract with like an Amazon Web Service. Here's 4 more pages of standard contract clauses that the Europeans want in there to make sure you abide with white glove treatment for this data when you take it over to India and you move it to Japan and you move Philip's data somewhere else. And so you end up with a morass of agreements and problems, but at least we have a story to tell the EU that, look, we put on our white gloves and our lab coats while we touched your data, and it makes them happier.
Okay, yeah, I guess that makes sense. I hadn't thought about pulling the data back over here and then sending it off to other countries. It was then, touching it as well. Yeah, I guess that doesn't fall in line with the Privacy Shield. So,
yeah, that's the problem with the Privacy Shield. It's great for smaller companies that only have one U.S. data center and they just want to pull European data and do something with it here. But boy, the minute we have 60 data centers worldwide, so we move stuff. It just doesn't work as easily for us.
Yeah.
Anything else then about? That was a great question, Phil. I mean, that a lot of people don't know about Privacy Shield, and so, but it's my world. I wet the bed about every day. So, it's just scary. A 4% global revenue fine. That's $2.6 billion for us, and that comes right off the bottom line. And we already paid $1.2 billion a few years ago for an antitrust violation. We don't need any more of those. But talking about bankruptcy, then bankrupting people because of big fines. Any other bankruptcy issues this week or going into next week's topics? Comfortable with
one of the hardest concepts of bankruptcy that you find students struggling with in this unit?
Yeah, it's a good question, Gina. I think the hardest part is understanding chapter 7 verses 11 versus 13. It seems silly, but for people that didn't do the reading very well or still struggle with that, can anybody explain the differences between 7, 11, and 13 in a cogent way to all of us?
Well, this might not be strictly informational, but the best way I found to separate the 3 of them out is I went through with different colored sticky note tabs, and I made sure that the important information was tabbed out in different colors for each chapter and section. And it really helps if you just physically separate it like that, because if you're not physically separating it and you're having a hard time differentiating between all 3 of them, then that might help you in making sure that there's 3 separate compartments. Okay, color yellow is this chapter 7, color color purple is chapter 11, color pink is chapter 13. And then all you have to do is recognize, oh, this question has to deal with my pink section, or this question has to do with my purple section. And then you can go from there and really make sure that you're understanding bankruptcy in a more efficient way.
It's great practical advice. Anything that triggers your mind to remember, I think that's great, Matt. Do you have a problem, per Gina's question too? You know, does everybody, do you have a problem with companies using a certain chapter to be able to buy some time before going back in and paying their bills? You know, one of the chapters obviously is full bankruptcy for corporations, but another one is, you know, give us a break for a while. Bankruptcy protection, they call it. You know, let's, you know, you'll hear in the news they filed for bankruptcy protection. Do you think it's a good thing to have corporations just be able to sit back and take a breath, you know, and not have to pay for a month or two and then get back into the swing of things, or restructure their, you know, bankruptcy restructuring? Or do you think that's a cop out and we should do away with that? Any thoughts?
I think a lot of it's situational, just like law. I mean, law is situational. It depends on situations. Sometimes those corporations do need the break, but then there's always, I mean, I feel like this has been talked about quite a few different lessons, where you find the corporations that are just going to take it as a loophole and make it a way to just be able to sit back and make more money without having to pay debts that are due.
That's what I think. I always feel like, and maybe I'm wrong, but I always feel like the big corporations do use it as a loophole. And so that gives them time to restructure, find a better solution, whatnot. And that to me seems very frustrating, because that seems unethical. And so I always struggle with that thought. And maybe I don't fully understand the corporate world. But from my perspective, it has always bothered me.
I was thinking about when students take out student loans and they make you go through like all these steps to make sure that you understand that you have to repay and when you have to repay and the interest rate, and they make you take a test and everything. And then, like, I mean, even if you file bankruptcy, the student can't include, usually, right, the student loan in that. And I think that should be the same with corporations. Like, they should go through this process where, do you understand that you have to repay this, this, and this if you go into business? I don't know how, because I'm sure they have a lot of different creditors, and maybe they do, and obviously they do sign a contract, but they should be held liable just like students. I think, I don't know.
It's funny how politics gets in the way, doesn't it? You know, they say, well, for the societal good, a company that hires or that's employed 13,000 employees, let's give them a break, and let's give them a chapter, you know, let's encourage chapter 11 rather than 7, you know, so that their loans with their different debtors, and that way kind of morph it into a payable, you know, when you're always in the red as a company, let's keep those people employed and keep the company on its feet, so that, or a chapter 13, which is a even better, you know, a restructuring of the loans, where it's hardly even a bankruptcy, it's more of a breather, versus an individual who, you know, try as you may, often a bankruptcy court will, like Gina said, just say, hey, societally, maybe you should just start over, and restructuring all of your little pithy, you know, telephone bills and stuff like that, just so you don't have to pay for water for 6 months, but then catch up later. You know, we don't trust that you won't be here again, because you're not a corporation with assets that could end up, you know, forging ahead and employing all these people. And so Gina's point's a good one. It's kind of like, why do they lessen the standard for a big corporation where probably a multi-millionaire and there, you know, he's just sitting back on a beach somewhere, versus a poor starving student that says, I can't get a job for now, and I want to defer my loan, but all this other stuff has hit me now. And yet the way society sees it is kind of the importance of the masses. Does that bother anybody else besides Gina? You know, what about our government? They should have been bankrupt a long time ago. You know, and yet we're in the trillions now in deficit spending because all of us need our PlayStation 4 and our Toyota, and we don't make enough products here in this country to offset the deficit. But hey, it's Pacioli's accounting, right? I mean, the fact that there's 3 more zeros on this side of the line than that, who's going to come after us? The U.S. is still the best creditor, best investment target in the world. You know, let's just sell a few more 1,000 miles of acreage and beachfront property to the Chinese while they're having it good, and we'll catch up at some later day. And we're investing in you. That's why we're taking this deficit, so that you can have your Chinese honey and not have to buy it from Idaho anymore, from producers who pay minimum wage instead of the pennies that they manufacture over here. Are you at all? Should our government, you know, there was a guy out of Idaho. Some of you live in Idaho. What was his name? Can't remember his name, but he ran under the ticket, a libertarian ticket in the 80s, even back then when there was still a deficit, saying, why don't we bankrupt the Federal Reserve Bank for one day and then start it fresh the next day with a zero balance? Since a third of our data we owe to ourselves, or a third of our debt we owe to our own people. Let's just wipe it. You know, quit the interest from being a fan in the back room. You know, with the interest going like this, like an air conditioning. Let's just zero it out by bankrupting our own bank ourselves and start with a zero balance again. They think that's a good idea, better than bankruptcy. I don't think
What
Monique
would
likes that idea.
happen? What would happen if that actually were to be?
I feel like if that were to go forward, I feel like it would be so detrimental to the world's economy.
That's what I think.
People all over the world. I mean, it would. I think if the U.S. decided to go through and do that, it would zero the balance on the books for everybody in the entire world. I don't think that it would be just the U.S. that would be affected on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
His idea, it was Bo Gritz, Gritz, I think, out of Idaho guy, that he got some following, because what he said was, whatever we owe the Chinese or the Russians or whoever, let's carry that over into a sub bank for one day and then put it back in the reserve books. But that's a third of what we owe. Another third of what we owe is to ourselves. So let's just bankrupt it so we can zero out that part of it and start afresh. But he was deemed kind of a lunatic because of not because of the accounting or the way that it would, or the way that people wouldn't be paid. What it did was it was a credibility factor. It would say, really? So the U.S., who's a pattern for the world, is going to bankrupt their own bank to get away from the fan spinning on interest and not be accountable to themselves even? And so I admired our people for not voting him in. But at the same time, I mean, we're looking at trillions of dollars of deficit that, you know, a good third of which could be erased. You might say, well, we owe it to ourselves. We've already paid the people that built the Pennsylvania Museum for $500 million under pork belly politics to get some senatorial vote. What's housed? It's the Federal Reserve Bank that's holding all these IOUs from our own people, that they've paid it out. So contractors, everybody's been paid. They're just holding on to it in the hopes that someday our economy goes up high enough that money comes back flooding into their bank. So if all it is an accounting error, accounting issue, let's just remove the accounting issue. Let's just, if you don't like if you still owe your children, you've paid your children, and you're holding IOUs for your children. Let's just have your children bankrupt you as parents, and then you start over so they don't owe you anymore. It's kind of an interesting, thought, but is it really accountable and professional and credible to the world's market? I mean, the U.S. had a AAA rating. They just dove to a AA rating in the world, and everybody screamed and pitched a fit a couple of years ago, saying, "What are we going to do? We're not a AAA rating anymore as a country. What will investors think?" Every other country is below AA. So we're still the best investment in the world. China owns, like a fifth of our debt. The UK owns another. People are betting on us because we consume 4 times the amount of any other country in the world, and we only have 300 million people, and that's not per capita. 4 times the consumption. China is starting to get up there, but 4 times the consumer of any other country in the world. Why wouldn't you bet on us, even with the deficit we have? I don't know. From Gina's point, she'd probably say, bankrupt it. I'm not just you, Gina, but many people. Let's let those car manufacturers go downhill. After 2008, let's let them go bankrupt. Start GM over as something else. But all the cars that go into the world and everything, they buffer these companies to try to. And Mitt Romney was behind it. Let's let them be accountable for what they did, and let's start them over. The best thing is repentance. Best thing is bankruptcy. We know that in the church speak, but a lot of other people didn't agree, and they buffered and buoyed up these companies that are now trying to make enough money that they can pay their way out of what they owe the government, so they don't have to be regulated as much anymore. And I don't know. I wish Gina, and me could do that with our student loans, right?
So I'm still going to interject that it's not honest to spend money and then expect not to pay it back.
Yep.
Yeah, good point. It's a very good point, and I think it's why we retain some of our credibility. We're not going to just do away. If you don't like your debt, just find an accounting way to get rid of it.
Nobody likes their debt, so.
Yeah.
Well, if I understand correctly, most businesses file a Chapter 11, but they have to still repay all of their creditors.
Yeah, they get to keep their assets, so they keep all their desks and tables and computers and everything, but they restructure it so that they can pay, and the creditors take it on the chin. If creditors say, well, under Chapter 11, we hate the Monique Fallon company so much that we're going to put her into involuntary bankruptcy, Chapter 7. You can do that. You can file and just say, look, I don't want to be restructured. I want Monique to pay me. She owes me for those glistening oak desks that she bought for her entire population of employees.
Not going to do it. Not going to do it.
But debt creditors that do that are often faced with the fact that then Gina's company, or Gina just says, look, or Monique just says, fine, you're going to get pennies on the dollar then. So if I'm Chapter 7, right, you'll get your pound of flesh by putting me into bankruptcy, and that'll be great because it'll be on the cover of the Wall Street Journal, and you'll laugh at me. But at the end of the day, you're not going to get what you put into me. So why don't you let me Chapter 11 it, so I can kind of pay for those desks over a little more time, a little bit lower interest rate. I'll still pay you, but it's not under the terms we agreed on. And the bankruptcy judge has to carefully monitor that so that the companies don't, the creditor doesn't strangle Monique, and Monique doesn't say, fine, Chapter 7 me then. You get nothing.
So I have a question. I'm sorry if it was covered already, but it seemed like when I was reading in the Wall Street Journal that most of the bankruptcies were Chapter 11, and they switched them over to Chapter 7. Did I miss that, or is that a valid question? That why not just do it in the first place?
I think you're right. I think it's that very dynamic. They start with Chapter 11. They promise the world, and the court gets involved with the trustee that says, okay, here's their assets. We just want to lower all the payments so that they can continue to employ these people and own their assets. Chapter 13 is even less, more of a restructuring at all, and you barely even touch it with the bankruptcy court. But what happens is things break down. The company, after 6 months in bankruptcy court, isn't making any money. They're losing money. Their credibility shot because they filed Chapter 11. People find out about it. They stop using that product, or they stop supplying to that company, because heaven forbid, what am I going to do? Give them even more desks and have them, file a Chapter 7 in 2 years? Forget it. And it's very hard I think Susan's right, it's very hard for a company to file Chapter 11 and expect to get out of it. And yet, you look at Boeing, you look at American Airlines, you look at all these big companies, boy, they've just filed Chapter 11 and 13 so many times and have gotten away with it. Is it a good thing? Because they're still around. They're still doing great service. They've employed hundreds of thousands of people. People have retired, well, all because, maybe they had a few down years. Maybe you do, just in church terms, you disfellowship someone rather than excommunicating them. Is that, that you're asking all the right questions, and it's a societal problem. And Gina's one stares you in the face, like, well, then why are you treating the guy that works at McDonald's any less penitently or forgivingly than you do these big companies? I don't know. I probably haven't answered your question, Susan, because I don't think there is an answer.
Well, is there any law that says you can only file bankruptcy once? Or, I mean, if it's working for the big companies, why wouldn't they just keep doing it over and over again?
And they do. They sometimes. So what's the law? How many years do you have to wait after your bankruptcy to get reinstated?
Well, I think it's 7 that you're before you can take a loan.
That's right. It's 7 years that you can't file multiple bankruptcies within 7 years. And what companies will try to do is they'll put they'll move assets in a way that, and this is the bad companies, so don't do this at home. But they know that a bankruptcy court can look 6 months back, literally reverse. It's called reverse any transaction that happened within that period. So a lot of people, if I were going bankrupt, I would send my Les Paul guitar to my dad and all my nice assets and say, here, Dad, you now own this. Here, give me a receipt for that. But I'm going to get it back, after this whole bankruptcy mess is over. And so a bankruptcy court can reach back, called a reach back, and reverse any transactions in the 6 months prior. So a lot of companies do it 6 months and 1 day prior.
So, well, okay, so that's different than a fraudulent conveyance, which goes back 3 years.
True. If fraud's involved, boy, it could be even more than 3 years. 3 years is definitely the law. But if it was fraud, you could have an attorney in there arguing that this should be reversed, even if it was 10 years ago, and there were 17 emails saying, in 10 years I'm going to go bankrupt, and so I want you to keep these diamonds. So fraud, all bets are off. If you can prove fraud, boy, people go to jail. But if it's kind of that, well, did he really sell his guitar to his dad to get out of losing it? I don't see any emails to that effect. There was just a receipt. The dad's not willing to testify, so unless it happened within that 6 months and I can't prove the 3-year fraudulent conveyance, then a lot of times creditors are stuck with whatever's left. Purchase money security interests, you probably read about those, PMSIs. If I sell Susan 16 bikes and she goes bankrupt the next day and says, sorry, these bikes are now going to, my credit card company in bankruptcy, I can reach through the bankruptcy and get at least my security interest. Again, presuming you wrote that into your contract, that these bikes are now conveyed or sold as it helps. It's not dispositive, but you usually should put in there, I am selling 16 bikes and if I don't get my money back out of that, then they represent a purchase money security interest. So at least I get my bikes back. They might be used, they might be broken, but I get them back and I can use them to resell it. But some credit card, some super priority can't come in or the lawyer's fund or the courts can't say, well, we're going to use those bikes to pay our fees for this for Susan's bankruptcy. So it's important in your contracting and your business part of your life to, if you're giving something of value, make sure you attach a purchase money security interest. All you have to say in the contract is, this represents a purchase money security interest. And till we get paid the loan back for it, I get it out if you're going to go bankrupt. People will be shocked that you put it in the contract, but it works. To argue for your bikes with 17 other creditors in line for the 3-hour wait for your court date every 5 months.
Wish I knew about that 2 months ago before I signed this contract. I didn't put it in the contract.
Yeah. Well, you just have to prove it. It's a he said, she said. No, those bikes were given to me. You know, your debtor might say that those bikes they're different. They're not PMSIs. They represent equipment of our company. They were used for, taking pizza somewhere, so they're part of the transportation expense. They weren't, but you would probably still win. You just have to argue a lot harder. As that, no, I expected to get my money back. If I can't get my money back, I get those, and you'd probably win. But it's a lot cleaner. A bankruptcy judge the first day will say, okay, PMSI, take those assets out of the stack and give them back to those creditors.
I think your name is Gina, that you had a contract that didn't get fulfilled. Is that right?
Yeah, so I was just thinking about that, but because I saw in the video that that they have to pay employee wages, but if you're a contractor or independent contractor for them, then you wouldn't be included in that.
Oh, bummer.
Not as high on the priority.
Yeah, I
stack.
was just thinking.
It's unfortunate. Yeah, another risk that independent contractors take in bankruptcy. They fall below the employees who dedicated their lives to the entity and are getting, losing their jobs rather than just the freedom of contracting with who you want. They've woven that into the priority somehow. So it's a very good point, Gina and Susan. Thanks for bringing that one up. Well, I have a few more minutes left. If anybody has any other questions, you excited with where we're going from here? I think these last chapters are kind of they're not as fundamental. They're more, things like intellectual property and stuff. How dare the founders of the Constitution, weave into one of the first phrases that patents and other things could be legal monopolies. How dare my Propecia, for hair growth, can charge me $200 a pill for the first 17 years and then have to after that, compete with everybody else simply because they came up with a great hair growth patent. I don't use Propecia, by the way. Don't need to. My hair's perfect, but that's an example of one. Maybe you've seen some medications. You look on why is this medication generic? This one I have to pay $200 a pill for. Believe me, the patent owners are getting their money back on a legal monopoly, called intellectual property. And it incents people. I worked for one, Patrick Soon-Shiong down in LA. He was worth $10 billion because he cornered the market on heparin and then cornered it on Abraxane. Both of them he sold for $3 billion a piece, the rights to. So, I mean, you can make a lot of money. And the founding fathers and mothers of our country decided, we want to give legal monopolies to incent people like Amanda to go off and make something great and get paid for it, not just very next day have somebody copy it, because nobody will invent anything anymore.
Is that what happened with the EpiPens?
Yeah, great example. And right now Brazil is really thumbing their nose in it. No offense to our Brazilian friend here. I guess she left. So okay, so we can talk about her.
Well, no, tell me what happened with the pen then, the EpiPen.
Go ahead, Gina.
Their prices recently skyrocketed.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of issues. There were a lot of consumer complaints and
sorry, Amanda.
Of boycotts and all kinds of stuff. But yeah. Like $200 a pen or something outrageous.
Yeah. Anti-scorpion venom or antidote here in Arizona is $1,000 an administration.
No kidding.
You get
Wow.
stung by a scorpion. Somebody invented a venom, anti-venom that works. Babies are dying of asphyxiation because a scorpion will fall down in their overalls and sit and sting them and sting them and sting them, and their throat will close and they'll die. So you rush them to the hospital. They administer an anti-scorpion venom, and that is making $1,000 a shot. EpiPen, same thing. You eat a nut, your face swells up, you start not breathing, you hit the EpiPen. My son is one of those, and for a long time they had a really good EpiPen that worked at a cheap price, but approved and repatented the product, and now boom, we're stuck with a higher price for this necessity of life. Is that fair? India decided it wasn't. They pirate about 72 billion in U.S. pharmaceuticals a year from us, and that's what we can measure. The Brazilians, they just basically said to the U.S. a year or two ago that their HIV problem is so bad that they're just going to copy. They're not going to on HIV. They are not going to. They're not going to observe patent rights of HIV medicine holders. They will copy everything just in the name of preservation of their people. Is that right? But what about the patent owner? You know how many years they spent, going through the FDA process to clear this thing? Do we go to war over this?
Well,
What
that's
makes
a
it?
dilemma.
Matt's kid wants to go to war over that.
Hey, yeah, no, he's nap time and he doesn't want to go down. It just makes it really hard for all of this makes it really hard for us honest people who are really trying to get out of debt honestly and do whatever we can to help everybody else, because it really makes it hard to do that when you got other people cheating their way to the top.
Yeah, cheat and they copy your ideas, but yet the ideas are protected for 17 years, so they can charge whatever they want, or they can preclude. There's kind of a theory out there that every time a good rubber compound comes out that will extend the life of our tires 4 to 5 years on each tire, Goodyear or Michelin or somebody will buy up the patent for $500 million, and then the invention goes away and doesn't help any of us. Conspiracy theory, maybe, but why aren't our tires any better than they used to be 20 years ago? There's got to be a rubber compound that, like concrete, works for 5 more years than it does. I pay $500 for each of my tires on my Hummer, and I get sickened every time I think about that I'm even driving a Hummer right now in today's world. But I was talked into it, so there. by my brother who's in Delta Force, and he said I had to buy his car, but I hate it. It gets 9 miles a gallon. It's a useless vehicle. $500 a tire. Why can't they make a rubber compound that makes me not have to pay $2,000 for tires every 2 years? Somebody is hiding a patent somewhere.
So if
rubber
say
compound
the
that they
tire company were to go bankrupt, are the CEOs always protected?
Good point. There's oftentimes immunities that the company gives them, and when they become CEO, there's a contract you sign that says, here's the indemnities and things we will protect you from. We are trusting you won't lead our company down a bad path. If you commit fraud, all bets are off. Commit some sort of crime or go outside of the confidentiality, or the way Delaware law says it is your duties of loyalty, good faith, and fair dealing. Some of these duties outlined in Delaware law, pretty much everybody else follows, which is if there's evidence you haven't, egregious evidence that you've really screwed over the shareholders or done something to hurt the company. But if you haven't done those things, then there's this protective bubble that oftentimes protects a CEO, because without him or her, we would have not reached the heights that we reached, and we had to take a risk on this person. And so I get very upset with Enron. 16 years ago, I had a choice of taking a job with Intel or Enron. And Enron was 20 grand more a year, but something was just wrong with it. And I was so glad for the Spirit, because I had no other way to test the fact that Enron would have screwed over all their employees. And yeah, their Ken Lay, their chairman of the board, he did commit suicide. And Jeff Skilling went to jail and is sitting in a jail now, skulking for another 20 years for violations that they found through the contract that they both signed as executives, to be able to get at those people personally and pierce the corporate veil, it's called. But Gina's point's well taken. If you've got bad parents, should we hang them out to dry simply because they yelled at their kids or spanked them one too many times? You take a risk on parents doing their job, and companies take a risk on officers doing their job to make the company better, and they're willing to risk the company going downhill for it. Is that fair to you student loan holders who aren't a CEO but are held to the full exigencies of life and law?
Sometimes it just seems unfair if they walk away with millions still, but the company you worked for is, bankrupt.
Yeah.
And everybody else walks away with nothing.
Yeah.
Well,
You'll see Intel every time a CEO decides to liquidate stock, it's immediately published somewhere to say, Intel CEO, liquidates all this stock, which means, they just take it out of Intel stock and put their own into somewhere else that's safer for them. And it's like a loyalty issue. What? You're liquidating your own stock, your own company. Why? How can you do this? But it makes the board think, do we have a CEO that's really on board? And so these CEOs are very careful to only liquidate 2% at a time to stay under the radar. But they don't want all their eggs in one basket. Their employee pension is, but theirs isn't. It's disgusting in some ways, but it's the way, you want to take a bet on this person who can lead you to the next stratosphere. You got to give up something for that, and employees unfortunately don't have a vote a lot of times. Oh, ugly world we live in, right?
Still comes down to the ethics,
Yeah, it always does, doesn't it? Monique's right. And we'll cover that. That's another chapter too we're going to cover soon. I just think that chapter, ethics, and then intellectual property, I know we're 2 minutes over, so we'll end now, but because I know y'all have to go to stuff. I got a call right now I got to go to, but copyright. How can Romeo and Juliet be written a certain way and then the same plot, same dueling families, this time from Cuba and the U.S., sharks and the jets, and yet and one person kills the brother of the other and then they commit suicide? Why is it the same story but not a violation of Shakespeare's estate? Well, for one thing, copyright only lasts 70 years, so Shakespeare's out. For another thing, copyright is the expression of an idea, not the idea of itself. So the fact that now Gina wants to come in and write East Side Story about, her life and love of another person who was from a family that her family hated, and they go about their little things, and in the end, Gina commits suicide. Gina. As long as she expresses it a different way, it's not a copyright violation. And so a lot of rock singers are saying, well, wait a minute, it was an expression. This person stole my song and just added different lyrics, same chord patterns. And amazing science has gone into this to figure out, did somebody copy someone's expression or not? And so copyright is very interesting too, as are trade secrets and trademarks. We'll go into all of that and you'll understand it better I think as lawyers and business people, to know how you can get a legal monopoly for your company. Boy, that's a big selling point if you're an IP attorney. So,
yeah.
All right.
Can
Well,
I ask a quick
close.
question about the exam coming up?
Sure, Mike.
So
Yeah,
are we going to have a similar pre-test like we did last time? And will we have access to see the results of that so we know what we need to study?
That's the one part I can't convince the course creator to change. And that's, so what I did this time is, what she said was, if your students really don't want to know just what's exposed on the exam, then don't show them old exams that we might reuse again, because they'll, cheating could occur. Instead, populate the pre-exam with the quiz questions from you all, that have the explanations and the answers to them. And so we're going to try it this time to do a pre-exam with quiz questions that, you know, cover a lot of these topics, but, you know, you might have seen, you'll probably have seen most of these on your quizzes. And that way, go through those, you'll know at least what's there, but you'll also have the explanations. Oh yeah, that's right. It's section 507 of the UCC, not 102 that covers that. It's not as good as what I'd like, which is give you old exam questions and give you the answers to them. But the course creator has only made up a certain number of exam questions and she wants to reuse them. So I can't get around that, unfortunately.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. I just was wondering what to expect.
Yeah. That's you can expect quiz questions with answers, and if you say to me that was worthless, I've already got the quiz question. I don't need that. I want to have to figure something else out.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Have a good evening.